Hey, I know that you're super excited, so am I. I am Dr. Jefferson, and thank you so much for watching Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson. This is a show where we reflect and we talk about popular hot topics in the community and our society here in the United States and abroad, and very difficult, challenging topics. I explore the very difficult topics within our community, within the Black community, within the white community, within the American community, the difficult conversations around accountability that most people are afraid to, step into. I am here for it. So again, I appreciate you for taking the time out to click the play button, and I'm just waiting to come in and rock your world with the next topic. Hello, hello, hello. How are you guys? Today is a very interesting topic, and it's one that I feel like needs more exposure. We definitely need to be talking about it a lot more. And I want to thank the viewer for sending this in. This came from Dan in Ohio, and I'm definitely looking forward to kind of delving into this. There are so many different components to it. There are so many different sides to understanding and having this conversation. And I feel like what makes it difficult is the fact that it's more than what we see on the surface. Okay. And there are a lot of layers. And I think for a lot of people, oftentimes it's difficult for us to have conversations where those conversations resonate with things that, or agendas that we have on a personal level, right? And we can see where we're incongruent with our own personal agenda, the things that we're pushing for ourselves, in the way that we're responding to these things. So in having this discussion today, I want to invite you guys to share your insights. Definitely like and share this post. Definitely share this content, share my channel and all that great stuff, because I am in the process of trying to build my following on YouTube and that kind of stuff. But more importantly, share it because this is a conversation that needs to be had. Over the course of time, from the 50s to now, every single person at some point in their life has had a person in their family system that identifies with or falls in the realms of the classifications within LGBTQI community. And the interesting thing is that this part is expanding in such a way that we can barely keep up with the right language, right, for it. And so I feel like oftentimes we're slamming too many things under the same housing because we can't necessarily identify how or why these people are the way they are per se. Society is sometimes not prepared to deal with shifts because I feel like society is already dealing with enough shifts, and we're already very reluctant to step into a place where we're accepting those shifts that we are finding ourselves in acceptance of. Hey Mario, how are you? So, okay, so I will share you the link so you can come in. Give me just a sec. Let me do that. And for anybody else who wants to come in and share their insights on the show, you guys can definitely do that. You should be able to find the link in the comment section. I know that Susanna will be on here soon, and she's going to co-host and navigate this discussion with me, from the clinical perspective. But I would definitely like to hear what you guys are feeling on your end and how you feel you have dealt with the impact of the shifts that are required for us to step into a place as a society where we're accepting people who look different and operate differently than we do, right? So I want to post the first question up, as we jump into this discussion, because I want this to be a more structured conversation. And I want you guys to answer specific questions around this. And for some of you that are coming into this discussion, you have absolutely no idea what LGBTQI means, right? Or any of it, where it came from, where it derived from, and things like that. And so I'm going to give a little bit of education around the topic as well. So I'm posting this question. And for those of you who are on here viewing this, and for those of you who have shared it, I want you to post your answer to this question. I want you to post to me what you feel like LGBTQI plus community represents, and where you feel like the background comes from, because everybody has a very, very different interpretation of things. Sometimes our viewpoints are different because we're different and our experiences are different. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to do that. And for those of you who are checking me out for the first time, know that I am Dr. Jefferson, and I'm the host of Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson. And Susanna is my amazing co-host. And on Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson, I have a podcast, video cast, social media following, and all of that good stuff. But we discuss the very difficult topics where it makes people feel uncomfortable to have those discussions that would expand our knowledge base and our understanding in the way that we operate with one another in society in general, not only in America, but worldwide. And so without further ado, I'll let Susanna introduce herself.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Susanna Stone. I am the founder of Recovering Consulting to a Different Lens, where I provide a private practice, counseling for individual counseling. I do couples, and I do clinical supervision for licensed professionals who are working on their licensure as a therapist. So I also see, LPC, LMFT. You just saw the name. There's just a couple that I mentioned. My goal is also to assist in providing some program management for agencies who's just starting up their program and sort of wants to know how to put a structure in their program. So that's kind of me. My specialty really is addiction and trauma work. But I'm always encouraged to be here with my partner in crime, Dr. Jefferson, just talking about stuff that are important to us and what we see as we, work in our practice. So thank you everyone for being on board with us. And this is a really good topic.
My mic is muted. But yeah, so I was saying I thank you for coming on last minute. I know it was kind of like a last minute thing for you to appear today, make this appearance. But I feel like this is a very important discussion that we're having. And I feel like it's, folks have got to be not only educated, but start having conversations around this, because oftentimes I hear from people in the LGBTQI community that they don't feel supported, and that they get stares when they're out in public as couples. I feel like they oftentimes feel scrutinized. And this goes all the way back to a lot of different issues with our culture. And I feel like the more willing we are to identify that this is a problem, to identify that there are some people in the world who feel lesser than just because of who they are. I feel like the more often we start having that conversation and we recognize that there is a need for a collaboration and change, I feel like the closer we are to bridging the gap, if the gap can ever be bridged. And that's one of the questions that's out there, kind of like for the viewers today as well. So before we jump into kind of like the collaborative discussion or whatever, I want to talk about and identify what LGBTQI is. And now it's LGBTQI plus, right? So for those of you who, are kind of just stepping into this language and trying to figure out kind of where this comes from, LGBTQI plus used to just be LGB. And LGB stands for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, right? Lesbian being women who are in relationships with one another, whether those women have feminine characteristics, the both of them, or one of them have more masculine and the other one has more feminine characteristics, or and those relationships used to look different, lots of different ways, but it's just female to female. And to be honest with you, back in the day where was a thing, and you know um, we looked at lesbian relations, a lot of times you had people, and we're going to talk about sexuality as well. You had people who identified as far as their gender, they
Mhm.
identified as female, but they were born male and had sex changes, and now they're in relationships with females, and they still were considered to be lesbian as well. Um, Gay was a term that was referred back then, and we're talking about in the very early developmental stages, right? Between the 60s more so to the 80s,
Mhm.
um, leading all the way to the 90s, it was on the LGBT. And gay people were considered to be the male counterparts where they were in a relationship where the relationship was homosexual. So two people identifying as the same gender and both of them are male. That's what gay referred to back then. And then we have bisexual. So we're talking about people who are gender identifying as um, either male or female, and they're attracted sexually to both male and female gender people, whether those male and female gender people are transsexual or not, right? So then we moved into, and that's the crazy thing. Like back then, it was a normative thing. The transgenders are included on either scale. And then we moved into including the transgender as a whole separate classification.
Mhm.
Um, so then it became LGBT community, and the T would stand for transgender.
Mhm.
And so then we moved into adding the Q, which meant queer. So this person may not necessarily identify as a different sex than they were born, but we talked about what it looked like to be a person who was raised in a society where gender roles are very much a conditional element of your rearing. And you felt like or betrayed or acted out behaviors that were not in alignment with what the gender roles of your society, of your culture, or your subculture would have you acting out. And then we moved to the I, right? We added the I
Mhm.
in the 2000s, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I means intersex. And what was interesting to me in this particular classification of people after we moved past the 90s, right, to the late 90s, is that now they were adding not only sexuality components, but they were also adding gender components into this same housing. And I think that that's what made things so conflictuous. And that's what made things so very confusing for people who were trying to get on board and trying to advocate for um, people that are just different, who believe and
Mhm.
see life differently than what we see when we look at them, right? And so the intersex became a thing where, okay, they could be in the process of making a sex change, or they could be interested in people that are opposite sex, or people who are the same sex, or transgender people, or whatever.
Mhm.
But now we're including all of it. And so people who are queer are people who just behave differently than what society conditions them to behave in that particular gender role that society recognizes that they are, right? So they may have more masculine characteristics if they're a female, they may have more feminine characteristics if they are male, and still be solidly identifying with that particular sex. Okay. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we moved on to the next question? I don't know if you can see those questions over there for the show, but
Mhm.
kind of got a lot to cover.
No, I think you covered it. If
Okay.
anybody online wanted to add something else, sure.
So, for those of you watching, please understand that this is not just like a monolithic type of thing. You can definitely comment, add your value, because I feel like everybody has something to add. And
Mm-hmm.
you guys are definitely the experts in your processes,
Mm-hmm.
your experiences by way of those. And I want us to have a collaborative discussion at the end of the day. Also, for those of you coming in, do not forget to share this content because I want this conversation to continue um, across a span of people. So my network may not be as big as your network of people who identify in this particular community. And a lot of times we don't know those who do identify and who those don't, who are those who don't, right? And we don't know where people are in their developmental cycles and stages of life
Mm-hmm.
and how they see themselves or what they may need, right?
And this is no judgment. We're not making judgment. We're not an expert. You are the expert out
Mm-hmm.
there. So it's about us having a conversation about how we could, as a group of people, function together. How we could live together. What does this mean for other people? Because this is a big issue.
It is.
It's a divided issue.
So, the next question we're going to gauge is how does sexuality play a role in gender? So, I think I kind of talked about that a little bit as we talked
Mm,
about kind of how the LGB moved and expand into LGBTQ and then LGBTQI and then
mm,
everything else following. And so I'm going to let Susanna kind of expand a little bit on this one when we talk about when people hear or when they refer to sexuality, right? And
mhm,
they see people who are identifying as members of the LGBTQI community. Do you feel like because now things are so synced, right? Since they started to mix the sexuality component with the gender component,
mm.
do you feel like that's what makes it kind of ties it all in together, or do you feel like there's something else there? And also for you guys watching.
Well, I think what I have observed just in regular life, regular daily life, even working with professionals, is when they start to talk about the LGBT community, people often the first thing they think about is like sex. So if you see two guys, you think about the sexual behavior. If you see two girls, you think about the sexual behavior. And I think in order to understand what somebody's going through, you need to look at them as a person, because sex is just piece of our lives. It's more than what this community is wanting you to recognize. They want you to recognize them as a person who might be um, experiencing their life or understanding their life different from you. It's kind of the same like when you look at the whole, Black Lives Matter kind of stuff. All the black folks is really wanting you to say is, we're not saying your life doesn't matter. We just want you to know we want you to recognize ours does. So I think for this community, it's about going beyond thinking this is just about sexual behavior, that this is bigger than just sexual. We are people who are living our lives just like you. We function, we do the same thing. We just happen to not be heterosexual as you consider yourself, but that we're normal, regular people. And I think that's where society gets really hung up, because the culture plays so much part in people understanding who we are as human, as a group of people, that we don't recognize even when we have biases. And I know we were talking about this just before, and I'm open, transparent like you. I can't remember where I was, but I was in a bathroom and there was another woman in there with me, and this person walked in who, when you look, you see a male, and in my head I went, "Oh, it's a guy," and then I realized, "Oh my goodness, no, this is not a guy as I perceive. This person identifies as a female." And so I had to make the shift in my head. And the woman looked at me, because I think the look was like recognition, like, wait a minute, why is this guy walking in the bathroom? And I looked away, because I'm like, that's not what how I don't want to participate in that kind of a thinking. So I even know that I had to make some shift in my head because I when I looked, I saw a male figure, and I had to remind myself, look, this is a person just like me who has a right to come in this bathroom because he or she identify himself as one of somebody who is like me as a female, and I kind of let it go. So I know society is struggling with understanding this and what it really means that a guy sees himself as a female and vice versa. It's way beyond the sexuality. It's about a person who is as he wants you to recognize him or her, a person, and we often get confused about that, and we base our judgment on the sexuality piece of their behavior, and it's really not about that. It's really not about that.
Do you think, like, if you had to be completely honest, and hey Trey, hey Robert, how are you
Mhm.
guys doing? You guys are welcome to come in and share your
Yeah.
insights on the show. The link is in the comment section of whatever platform you guys are watching it on. And don't forget to share the content. Okay.
Mhm. Come on over, therapist. Come on in.
Right. But do you think that when we look at people, if we're being honest, right? Do you think that when we look at people in society, even male to female relationships, and we look at them and we see a very interesting something that draws us into the couple, do you think that we think of them and we think of their sexual components, whether or not they're intimate with one another and the way that they relate sexually? Like, do you think that's an innate thought, whether it's
I don't think so. I think because it's in our brain. It's in our brain that is with woman. And so that's how we've been brought up to think. And now there's a different level, there's a different structure in life of how some men views himself, how some women views himself. Heterosexual, I think, and I'm making a broad statement, we are entitled.
Mhm.
That's how life should be. And you'll hear there's a lot of religious piece that comes into this. The Bible says it's man and woman, not woman and woman, not woman and man. So when we see two heterosexual, we're like, oh, okay, two heterosexual. And when we see two men with each other expressing love and affection like our heterosexual do, we immediately think about the sexual piece. People don't want to talk about that. But I can guarantee you that becomes a big play. Well, guess what? I think as heterosexual, we probably practices the same behavior that we think gay man or lesbian woman practices. And nobody wants to talk about that. But I think that becomes a big piece.
So do you think for, because for me, right, when I look at people, when I look at couples, I'm always very curious as the way that they relate to one another.
Mhm.
Period. That's just me. It's an innate thing that I've always had since I was a child. And I've always been very curious about people. When I made the decision to become a medical doctor, I was more curious about human anatomy and the physiology of human anatomy and what made people work, what made them sick, and things
Mhm.
like that. As I learned more about people, I became more, I guess, curious about human
Mhm.
interaction. So that's what made
Mhm.
me kind of go down and become a psychotherapist, because I was like, well, I feel like I've done some great work in this field. Time for me to move on to this side of things. But the human conditioning and the human component has always been something that struck me as interesting and
Mhm.
something I wanted to contribute to and to better understand in my contributions. And so for me, and also I know this for my kids too, right? Because I feel like the process of parenting is a learning experience for us
Mhm.
parents who allow ourselves to learn from the vast knowledge and experience that our children will force us to, kind of go upon and the rabbit hole to
Mhm.
find answers, because kids are curious. Um, I'm a person who believes in asking questions. And I ask questions because these are things that I don't know and I would love to
Mhm.
know about, right? And I think that when we ask questions, it expands our knowledge base and our understanding of human beings, period. And so when I would see people that were coupled up, right?
Mhm.
I'd ask questions, you know. What do you think is the thing that keeps your relationship healthy? Do you feel like your relationship is healthy? Do you think you guys need some help? In what areas do you need help in? You know,
Right.
like how do you see your partner? Are you attracted to them? Like these are things that I was very naturally curious about because some people are in relationships and they don't have a physical attraction to their
Mhm.
partner, and
Mhm.
it's very normal. And some people are in relationships where they don't have a respect for their partner per se, right? The way the partner
Mhm.
wants to be respected, but they're physically attracted, which is quite the opposite. And so I feel like understanding is a thing that people need to be reaching for at the end of the day, because I know the curiosity is there in human beings. We don't go around in life and see people that look just like us every day when we walk out, right? So there's always a very curious component there. And some of the questions that we're going to delve into kind of reveal the layers of there being so much more here than what we can see on the surface and what we can conceptualize, because we're only looking on the surface and we're not really looking to delve into deep enough
Mhm.
these different areas of why it is that this is such a very expanded conversation so many
Mhm.
years later. You know what I'm talking? We're talking about
Mhm.
40, 50 years into doing this dance where we're trying to recognize that people as individuals will not always like the same thing, you
Mhm.
know, will not always present the same way. We're talking about where we've navigated from the conceptualization that this is a problem with people, either
Mhm.
spiritually or mentally, a medical issue. Like there have been so many different components to people presenting, I feel like from the medical field, the
Mhm.
sciences, right? And trying to gain a better understanding. We when we go into things in this field, we go in with biases, right?
Mhm.
And those implicit biases, whether they're professional biases or personal biases, they're still biased. And that's what leads our research.
Mhm.
That's what leads our curiosity, and it drives our insight into the things and exploring people. So I think that when I hear the type of complaint that I heard from this particular viewer, his particular complaint, just for you guys to know what the conversation has kind of moved and
Mhm.
developed from, his complaint was that he went in and he still identifies as a male, right?
Mhm.
So I want you guys to kind of hear me when I say this. He went in to have his child, he and his partner's child. And when he went in to have their child, like when they were going through the process of you know, prenatal care, right? There were so many things that offended
Mhm.
him. Why? Because he said the first time he went in for an appointment, you know, people were like, well, whoa, why is he here? You know, this is a GYN, OBGYN office. What are you doing here? Right. And so people did not know how to A, address him,
Mhm.
B, even start a conversation. So they were in the position. We're talking about people that are professionals, okay? People in the
Mhm.
medical field.
Mhm.
And you got to think about this is where this stuff starts, right? We are the people doing
Mhm.
the sex changes. So why is there not more education around understanding how it is that we need to now shape life in the medical field from a professional stance in order to accommodate what it is that we're doing?
Because there's no education. I think us in the medical field is not getting any education around understanding what's going on, how life is changing for people. So people depend on what they're familiar with. I'm familiar with male, female, male, female. I don't, I think people also don't understand. I'm in the process of trying to understand this as well myself. I think
Mhm.
I've been a lot more accepting. Like, people are people, and I don't put people in boxes such that I'm comparing. But sometimes I do because I come from a culture of where we were brought up of understanding who's a male and who's a female. But a couple of things I think people are not prepared because they're familiar with how life should be, and then suddenly here is this picture that looks different from their anticipation of how life is, and it's sudden that I don't know, what do I do? Well, what do you do when you are, confronted with situation you are unfamiliar with, you revert to the kind of skills that you always had to deal with how you feel, your frustration or your anxiety, because you're trying to figure out, do I like this or don't I like this? Is this okay? And if you don't know what to do, you'll revert to what you always know. And so people biases come into play, and they don't know how to talk about that. They don't know how to talk about that. And then there's another piece of the entitlement of this is how it should be because this is how we were always raised, and why, and then something is not right with you if you are different from how society is, because if you're different from society, you are forcing people to have different thoughts about how life looks, and that's an uncomfortable thing. We see that in treating our clients. Our clients come in because they recognize this to some degree. Something is not feeling okay for them, and then when we start to work through the process with them, what we get is what we consider like resentment, because we are saying, look, let's look at this differently. Let's help you understand this so that things could feel better for you, and that's uncomfortable for them because they got to go through that process. And in the meantime, going through the process is uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. It's something new and it's something different, and they don't know what to do. Our job then becomes to help them with the skills that is necessary to live their life to the best for them. So your doctor doesn't, he doesn't, if your doctor doesn't go out and get educated about understanding this community, he will continue to live by his own thoughts and belief of what male and female should look like. And it's no wonder they look at this person who's coming in the office like, why is he there? Well, why not?
Well, so more so of the people in there, wondering why is he there. Um,
Hmm.
and
Because
then I feel like there are a lot of levels, Okay.
ask a question, it's about going out and get educated, talking to the community, because if you sitting there with this ideology of male should be with female and or female should be with male, and then it looks different for you in your medical office, what are you doing? How are you understanding this person sitting in front of you? Are you going to go out and get some education about the community? So, because if you think of him or her as a certain way, you treat them a particular way, which is in fact then becomes a ethical issue, a legal issue. All that gets into play, and
But I think that there are certain I think that this discussion when he was explaining his experience to me, I think there are certain situations where grace is allowed. And
mm-hmm,
I feel like sometimes it goes back to and I really don't want to get ahead. I'm not sure which banner that we're on right now as far as the questions, but if I'm there, then I'll already, revert back to okay, I've explained it. It goes back to race relations. If we look at
mm-hmm,
the way the world shapes, so if we really want to understand what's happening here, I think we have to go to that, especially in America, right?
mm-hmm,
America is a great country to take a lesson from, even if we are where we are right now, which is a whole nother conversation. But America is a great country to take a lesson from when we're talking about transitions, right?
mm-hmm,
Cultural shifts and transitions. So we're a country that had to go through um, a situation where we had people enslaved that now became free by way of laws that changed. But those laws change after society changed. So the same thing is happening here. People who are identifying as a part of the LGBTQI community, those folks were a part of a societal shift before
mm-hmm.
the laws started to shift in their favor
Absolutely.
and allow them some of the basic human rights
Mm-hmm,
that other people had already been allowed as citizens. And to me, I feel like there is so much to be said about that in and of itself.
mm-hmm,
Nothing else, but just that in and of itself. Because my thing is, if you're a citizen, these laws already apply to you. That's the reason that I have so much of an issue with Black people advocating for laws to be changed for Black people, because we're all human beings, we're all citizens, we're all people. And if we're fighting for equality, if that's truly what we're fighting for, then there need to be no additional laws. we've already done the laws that abolish slavery, the separation of people by race and slavery, right? So nothing else needs to be done as far as creating new laws for Black people. I think the work needs to be done in creating new understandings
Mm-hmm.
around the proper interpretation of law
Definitely
as
the
it
law.
applies to Black people. And I think that those are two totally different things. You see what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, Trey. Awesome. And how are you today? Don't be texting and driving. Use voice to text. So, so for me, I feel like people have to learn to give grace, to render grace as this transition is taking place, because that's what we did as far as the racial or
Mm-hmm.
segregation, component, right? People had to get out of their heads the conditional element that they've already been conditioned to understand as the norm when it came to Blacks and whites, not only just the slavery component, but
Mm-hmm.
cohabitation in the same environments.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first made that transition, it was like, well, Black people definitely have rights just like white people. However, have y'all rights over there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
White people have their rights over there, right? But there will be no enslaving of Black people. I think the process, because there is a process here that we are ignoring. We're not giving ourselves grace. We're not giving ourselves, space for understanding that there is a process. And oftentimes with the community of LGBTQI plus comes this notion of, I don't want to say entitlement, but
Mm-hmm. It is.
the word that I feel like is more appropriate is resistance and resentment to the
Mm-hmm.
society that was already established prior to their introduction into norm culture. Um, and I think that that makes it more difficult to gain ground and, you know what I mean, get people to
Mm-hmm.
really understand where you're coming from. Because if you're going to come with a lot of attitude, and I know, that's a part of the hormonal
Mm-hmm.
component,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. There are definitely biological reasons that that's there. But I think in a society that is not medically driven, people don't understand why you have all this attitude, why you have all this sass per se,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're just trying to come to an understanding of you and the way that you operate so they can better communicate with you. They can better coexist with you. So I feel like those holes and those pockets are there because there is so much resistance because of where things were years before. Same thing when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to Black culture too.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much resistance because of what was there before, but we're not in the past. We can't live in the past. We're a culture that lives in constant states of trauma and
Mm-hmm.
re-traumatization based on the
Mm-hmm.
perceptions, not necessarily what's actually there, but the way that we receive the world around us and our interactions with that same said world. So I feel like within the LGBTQI community, there needs to be more grace rendered to the rest of society that doesn't identify,
Mm-hmm.
so that people can better understand you, people can meet you where you are, they can learn how to better, cultivate their understandings and their movements around your subculture within the culture, right? So what that looks like is if you walk into a doctor's office, if we had to go
Mm-hmm.
back to this person's
Mm-hmm.
story, if you walk into a doctor's office and you know that you're a trans man, you know that you were born a woman but now are a man, and you very much look like a man, walk like a man, talk like a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know that now society is they're acknowledging you as what you were
What
born
they see.
acknowledged as.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So they see a man now in an OBGYN appointment setting, and they're trying to figure out how they can help you, the male that they see before them,
Mm-hmm.
the physical component.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the question comes out, how do you identify? What do you like? What would you like for me to call you? Ma'am, sir, other, what? These are not offensive questions. These are questions where these people are trying to understand how they can better assist you
Mm-hmm.
within the competency of
Mm-hmm.
culture, right? That you obviously identify with. So trying to better understand a person And be respectful is not being disrespectful or
Mhm.
disregarding you.
It involves asking questions.
Right. And I feel like it doesn't say that the world isn't ready. The reality is the people who are identifying in these communities where they're asking to be seen as equivalent or whatever, they're not prepared for what this entails.
Right.
Right.
So
So
they
you
have the
can
level of anxiety as well as the doctor,
exactly.
because they are also coming into the person who they now have identified themselves as. And they now have to do a lot of the explaining when the doctor says you are male in this office. Because
Right.
the doctor doesn't know what is it, how can I assist you?
And if
You now have to
anything,
explain, to talk about.
and the way I see it, if anything, it's a easier transition than it was for Black people to move into acceptance in a culture where white was considered to be the standard, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So it's not like they're calling you out of your name and saying nigger with a hard R, you know what I'm saying, and
mm-hmm,
trying to come off of that language. It's that they're not insulting you. They're asking how they can better identify you by ways that you know what I mean, accept, because you got to understand that we're all different. When we think about Black people are all different. We're not all the same. We're not from the same culture or subcultural background. We all look very different. You got people that are Caribbean Black people. You got people that are African American Black people. You got
mm-hmm.
people, for me, I'm Finnish American Black person.
I'm West
So,
Indian.
right, right. So the thing is, just because a person looks a certain way doesn't mean that they identify the exact same way that other people look like them identify.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fair question to ask. And the offense that is taken has to do with the self work more so than it does those people and them asking the question in general. And I feel like we've got to be people that are honest about that component. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's where I see big gaps. I feel like the gaps are in the grace that's given,
Mm-hmm.
when people are trying to better understand and better gauge them. A lot of his complaints are around the way people see him,
Mm-hmm.
and saw him during his pregnancy, and he wanted to continue to be recognized as a he, even though he was pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
and that was amongst people that knew him from his childhood on,
Mm-hmm.
and friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people in the medical field. However, there are certain terms that are associated with labor, childbirth, the
Mm-hmm.
process that
C-section.
right, that he felt was disrespectful. And
Oh, wow.
you know how normally when a person's pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
the person pregnant is mom.
Mm-hmm.
The person carrying the baby is mom. And oftentimes in medical fields, medical settings, we refer to them as, hey mom, how you doing? Innately. Before
Mm-hmm.
we even realize that we've said it, we say it. And it's not offensive because this is a mom to be, because she's carrying a baby.
Which,
But
we understand how nature works, is females carry a baby.
exactly.
Right.
And essentially is this is a female body. So
Right.
even though you transition to a male, you're still carrying your womb that you were born with, because you were born female, is still carrying a baby. And
Mm-hmm.
so when they're referring to you as mom, they're not doing it to be disrespectful or offensive. They're doing it because that's the language associated with having a womb. That's why it's called
Right.
woman, womb. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the line of delineation between gender. So when you decide to be a transgender person, there are certain things that I think come with that, that sometimes you have to give people grace as they're now trying to move into the understanding of how you want to be identified.
So when you say grace, what do you mean?
Grace is space where you're not offended
Okay.
by the commentary. You're not offended by the natural intrinsic responses.
Mm-hmm.
Grace is where you understand that people don't understand who and how you identify.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, you move into a place of now explaining to them, hey, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that women carry babies because they are born with a womb. And I was born a woman. And I understand
Mm-hmm.
the construct of society and the way that we recognize childbirth. And I
Mm-hmm.
understand that now that I'm a trans man, that's something that is very difficult for you to recognize, but I would like to be addressed as sir, dad, because I am a man. That's why I think that's necessary. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that you should get upset and say that the medical field isn't ready to provide care for you or needs to prepare the room in a different way
Mm-hmm.
for you, because there are certain things that we need as doctors in
And
the
there may be two things going on for the female having the baby. One is your impatience and people not understanding your process.
right.
Two might be how the nurse or the doctor responds to you, because you are more sensitive to picking that up by virtue of this. This is a sensitive topic and a sensitive understanding of change in life. So you picking up their cues of like they were uncomfortable, and it's a reality. People are uncomfortable because they don't know how to perceive,
But they
how to
may not be
understand.
uncomfortable. It may
Huh?
just be that if they may not be uncomfortable, but they
Mm-hmm.
are accustomed to, because when we think about what we learn as doctors,
Mm-hmm.
we go to med school to understand the human anatomy and physiology. When we become an obstetrician and gynecologist,
Right.
the components of the female body that contribute to them being able to
Mm-hmm.
successfully give birth to a child. So these are the things that we're there to check,
Right.
right? And so you have those components because you
Mm-hmm.
are a trans man born a female, but we're only referring to the body, not the person, if that
Well,
makes sense.
but they might be. But that doctor doesn't come with his own bias or understanding of this person in front of him. Because in his mind, he's probably asking, when did this process take place, or like, what do I do now? I know I have to treat. There's a baby in here, and I need to take care of that. But then his bias is of also understanding that this is a guy who's now a female, and I think
Well, no, it's a trans man.
the
So
trans
born
man
a
who's
female,
having
but
born
now
a
a
female,
male.
a man, but having a baby. Stand corrected.
And I'm
Thanks for
sorry when I
correcting
said
me.
it's, I meant he,
But
because
the
he wants
doctor is
me just
having
he.
it. I'm sorry. But the doctor's having it in his head. He's trying to make sense of it too. And
Right.
be as neutral as he can be. And I think, the trans may be picking up some of that level of anxiety. And it's really just it's just both sides have to kind of sit with their uncomfortable feelings.
Right.
Or they are not sure what I need to do feelings. Or I'm not sure what to say feelings. You might have to sit with it. You just kind of stay still.
So what do you think, urban therapist? What are your thoughts around it?
Uh-huh.
Well, ladies, can y'all hear me good?
Yeah,
First of
we
all,
Yeah,
can.
go ahead, introduce
all right.
yourself to the folks and then give us your insights.
Hello, everybody. I'm the official urban therapist, and I have a Facebook and YouTube channel. It's simply called the official urban therapist. You can find me on all known platforms. Well, first of all, I am so happy that I'm back a part of the podcast again. As y'all know, I've been out of the country and I'm back now and I'm refreshed, fully
Saw you living
married.
your best life.
So,
All right.
so everything is all as well. I wanted to go ahead and jump in onto this conversation because I believe that this conversation needs to be had with us, especially since we're dealing with the LGBT movement this month. That's what they're doing, right? This LGBT Pride Month. That's what they're
Pride,
doing.
Yeah,
awareness.
Yeah,
LGBTQI plus.
Yes.
yeah, acronyms. But I believe that this is a really good conversation that we have, and I heard most of the things that you talk about, Dr. J. This is very interesting to me. Now, my perspective about that particular situation, it deals with more of the person trying to have a reassurance of their self or a certain identity with themselves versus the actual whole gender thing. Oh, somebody at my door. Give me 1 second, y'all. I'm going to detail. Let me answer my door real quick.
Okay, that's fine.
But
Okay.
yeah, and he's got a point that both persons are trying to become comfortable with who they are and how they understand each other.
Yeah, and I do feel like, oftentimes when we are offended as people,
Hmm.
um, we try and take our offense and we try and project that onto other folks, right? And make it their thing, but it's really our thing. That's why I express the need to do self work so often, because I feel like, when we are not aware of what biases we have as people, when we're going into a situation, it's easy for us to misconstrue the biases of other folks and what I call perceived bias. So you think a person is biased and they're not even biased. Like they could probably care less, on a personal level, but they're there for a professional reason to render a particular service to you. And in order for them to do that effectively, they need to know exactly what they're dealing with, as far as your body, who they're dealing with as far as the person, and how they can deal with them and better assist them. And that's the competency part as far as culture. So I'm going to ask enough questions, because just because we're both white, just because we're both black, just because we're both Caribbean, doesn't mean that we both have the same shared experiences, nor does that mean that we both have the same physical traumas to our body or medical history that could insight or give an indication of what we're dealing with as far as your body and your process that you're about to go through when we talk about childbirth. But for me, when he was talking about his experience and saying that he felt offended by some of the looks, some of the stares of the people that were also there, like these women act like I can't be here to get service. I can't have a baby because I look this way. No, I still put my female parts down there and inside so I could make sure that my husband and I could have a child. Okay, so the thing is this. We're not saying that there is anything wrong with what you're doing. What we're saying is there needs to be a certain level of understanding rendered on your part as people are trying to render those services to you. Doesn't mean that we're judging you. And I feel like the way that we bring these gaps to people's consciousness and the way that we find solutions is to have these conversations. I feel like sometimes we have our biases inside, internal biases, and we're afraid to ask questions around them. We're afraid to say that we have them because I think that we think that means something negative about us, right? But like I tell people all the time, people are people. There are no good people. There are no bad people. That are good. There are perceived good experiences and there are perceived bad experiences. But people are people. People can do good and bad things because that's also a perceptual component. And in order for us to better understand one another, we must be curious about the people and what motivates the people to do the things that they do. Um, but are you ready, urban therapist, to finish your spiel?
I'm back. I'm sorry about that, y'all.
Oh, no,
Yeah, I
you're
had some people delivering my groceries because I didn't feel like going to the grocery store today.
lazy.
No, but that's the new movement. That's the new movement,
See,
right?
I'm
Yeah.
judging.
Uh-huh.
I'm judging 100%. I might
That's
not
the
be
new
judging
movement.
people for being a member of the LGBTQI community, but I'm definitely judging everybody for being any community, any member of any community that ain't getting their own groceries because they don't feel like it.
Well, and then you tell yourself, if I have to walk into Walmart and nobody has on a mask but me, okay.
I actually went on Instacart this time. I do it on Walmart, but this time around I did on Instacart. So I had Instacart to deliver groceries from Kroger's for me because
Kroger's,
I just didn't feel like
Walmart,
getting up and getting out right now.
Bougie.
Kroger's, Walmart, Publix.
Yeah, but yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's well, whenever I hear these conversations about the LGBT community, the conclusion that I get to about this is that it's more of a cultural acceptance thing. It really don't have nothing to do per se with the sexuality or as we say even gender, but it's more of a cultural acceptance thing. And Dr. J, I was hearing you earlier. You was mentioned about race for us, like Black people want to be accepted into the culture. That's how they want to do. That's to be a member of the culture. I believe that the LGBT community is in the same. situation too, where they just want to be culturally accepted. Now, there are certain things that I agree with that they're doing to be accepted, but there are certain things that they also are doing that I don't agree with for the acceptance, like pushing this whole, like for example, pushing this whole homophobic issue, saying that if a person don't accept them for wherever they prescribe themselves to be, then you consider homophobic towards their acceptance, which I don't agree with that. In many cases, people if they don't understand certain situations, they emotionally they operate out of fear of the unknown instead of really trying to understand where the person is coming from. For us, for us them trying to adapt into their culture, and that's how I see it as the interpretation by that. Like I have family members who are gay, bisexual, and the like and stuff too. And one of their biggest concerns is that they feel like that the family is not going to accept them because of their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, this is true, which this brings us to a topic about religion. In some cases, that is true because in our family we have a lot of people who are very religious. So that type of evolution or change, people they just don't want to cultivate to that at all. They believe that it's not right. They believe, as they say, that it's a sin against God to subscribe to a different lifestyle. But however, how the way I personally perceive it is that at the end of the day, everybody is still a human being, period. And it's okay to respect them as a human being. You don't have to agree with their lifestyle, but it's okay to respect them as human beings, period. And that's where the issue comes for us. That just like I was saying earlier about their respect and stuff.
You know, when I think about it, okay, um, what I think this is how I feel about it when it comes to the religious component, right? I feel like religion, and a lot of people don't understand the origin of religion, and I think that has a lot to do with it. Religion in and of itself is subject to interpretation, which is why people go to church. They go to church and religious housing to better understand the religion from the space of and from the interpretation of that person they consider to be anointed or called to preach the gospel. And those people are considered to be the fathers. That's why in Catholic religion, you consider the person that is the leader of that, that particular religious assembly, religious house as father. But they're in every religion, even the ministers, the pastor, whatever, they're considered to be the fathers of forethought, the fathers of thought, the father of the process, the expert in the situation. And that person is charged with the responsibility of rendering education and insight to those people that are following that flock, right? And so you have to ask yourself, although these are words written inside of a book, whatever book it is that you're following, the Kabbalah, the Quran, the King James Bible, or whatever Bible you want to follow, whatever it is, the Book of Mormon, whatever that book is, right? Whatever that religion is that you are a part of, you have to ask yourself, the people that I hold responsible for rendering the education and insight that I house in regard to this particular religion, like, are those people walking in the way that I see that I want myself to walk, and do they have to walk that way? Not are they and should I, right? So not are they walking that walk and should I be walking that walk, but are they walking the walk and trying to understand, basically, do they have to be walking that walk? They don't have to be necessarily walking the walk that you need to be walking per se in order for you to be in alignment with the religion. Sometimes they move the way they move because of their personal components of their conditioning. So not necessarily the religious component driving what they're doing. People are comprised of social, cultural, and environmental context, okay, that are responsible for conditioning human beings. That's how personality develops. That's how we become people. The social component is the primal one, your first connection between parent, caregiver, and person, right, baby? And you start to shape your personality based off of that person's personality and the way that they respond to the environment around them. It teaches you how to innately respond to and adapt to the environment around you. And so we move from those particular positions into other more expanded positions of life. And I feel like when we look at religion, we often will say, okay, a person is not, how can you call yourself how religious? How can you call yourself a Christian or a follower of God or a follower of the cabal, etc.? How can you call yourself these things and still operate and move in a way that's very much against what it is this religion stand for? Now, the problem I have when people say that is that religion has no explicit, regardless of what book you're following, they have no explicit language in its basic foundation and foundational rules against or for homosexuality. They just don't. And your 10 commandments or, basic 10 rules are what the foundation is built upon. So we're not talking about the prophets and what they said, what these books, right? He say, she say. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the basic fundamental principles of a person being whatever religion or spirituality, the things that ground what is morally right and morally wrong with people and humanity. There is no mention. The word man is universal to man and woman. The word wife is subject to interpretation. So there are so many things that I feel like people have got to do as far as their internal work when it comes to the way that they move and judge people, other people that are in this walk of life. You can't select components from your religion and say, you're wrong, you're going to hell, and not be held accountable for your own wrongdoings. Because there are a lot of things that are just a part of life every single day that we do innately as people who are a part of conditioning, right, in society, in our environment. It's a lot of things that we do right now that don't align with the teachings of the Bible, the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of the Kabbalah. So there are a lot of things, and you can't decide to give yourself grace and not give the next person grace and space to grow and be. So that's how I feel about this one. You can't say that I'm a religious person and your religion or your interpretation of that religion be the end all be all, and then decide to condemn another person. So that's just how I feel about that particular question. What about you, Susanna?
Um, well, I think, when I think about religion, and I've moved past religion, I'm in a space of spirituality,
Likewise.
which is really about how I understand, my being in this world and having a power greater than me. I live by a power greater than me. I understand that there is. So by understanding that there's something greater than me, which created me, he created, or she created, who we all are. So I try as much as I can when I practice in faith that people are who they are. And part of our culture should be, I think, engulfing in our growing, in us being able to grow up to be the people we need to be, is to have some spiritual connectedness. Because that's how you relate to the world spiritually. Does it have, could we have culture and religion? Religion, I think people get religion really confused because it is this thing out there, and what people practice is spirituality, and they don't even really understand that sometimes. And yes, the Bible does not say homosexuality is a sin, contrary to what people think. It's really not written in that terms. People understand it that way, and that's about people not seeing someone who identified different to them, and what that does is it meshes with your comfort zone, and the way you deal with it is you talk about the Bible. The Bible says that homosexuality is a sin, so it's a sin. But what you make in those comments, because you are uncomfortable dealing with a population that you don't understand, with a way how people lifestyle that you don't understand, and that's why you ask questions. I had mentioned before you walked on urban therapist was I was in a bathroom and this person walked in, and when I looked up, my visual was of a male. And then the girl next to me looked at me. We kind of made eye contact. And I know what that meant. It's like he's walking in a female bathroom. And I had to really change my understanding and awareness that this is a female. Like, okay, this is a female. Not what I was conditioned to believe how people look. This is actually a female that walked in the bathroom. She has the right to come in this bathroom. So I know I had to make some shift in what I see and what I understand as a person, that this is really a female, not a male, because that's how this person identified themselves. And I was okay with it, but I'm well aware that my culture has taught me for the 59 years I've been around. This is what my culture has taught me, how people, male look this way and female look this way, and that's how it should be. And so I have had to make those shifts over the years in understanding people are the way they are. And, it's really, if you don't know, ask questions. It's really this, the guy in the doctor's office is the person there for a reason. He's there, she's there to educate the doctor, really, to understand what
Well,
this is, what this life is.
I
Because
think
the
most
doctor
of,
doesn't really know. Oh, is there someone else saying something?
well, yeah, I was saying,
Okay.
I think that most of his issues were with the nursing staff more so than the doctor. Because you got
Okay.
to think about it, as a doctor, we're in there for a very limited amount of time.
That's true. So you're really dealing with the nurse who just kind of wasn't sure what she needed to do or how she needed to say, because she knew she had to in some way be I don't know what's the right word, but she had to think about how to be comfortable and keep this person comfortable too.
But also with the people that were in there waiting for services. So the other women that
Mm-hmm.
were sitting in there
In the
waiting to be
lobby.
seen, right, in the lobby, and the husbands. And so, one of his comments was that, most people, he didn't have it as bad as some people would have had it, because he says that, okay, most people chumped it off to, oh, he's a guy with a beer belly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, one of the main complaints he got is that, oh my God, when people would find out that, he was a trans man and carrying their baby, and that he had gotten pregnant by traditional means because he's married to a what they call cis man. And that's a whole nother thing. When we get to the question about transitions and stuff in society, I'm going to really address that piece. But this is a man that's born a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's his partner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't want to go back to that comment about the question about sexuality, but so the thing that he would get, let's stay on this one first. The thing that he would get the most is that, oh, well, you guys shouldn't be allowed to raise kids. You shouldn't have kids if you don't even have your life figured out, this and the third. How do you guys feel about this? For the people that are viewing this, and don't forget, come in, like it, share it. Let's go. Let's have this conversation, because this is the big one. Should LGBTQI people, and then I do say LGBTQI plus people, be disallowed from parenting opportunities?
Who
Yeah,
makes that decision?
yeah, I'd like to address this too, and this is going to tie into the religious conversation that was having about it too. Now, through my experience, first of all, with my experience dealing with religion and me being a student of various type of religions, at the end of the day, religion is very subjective. Um, it's just based on one experience in life. Period. Now, y'all also mentioned about that the Bible or the Quran explicitly doesn't speak about homosexuality, but in reality, it actually really do. But it was from the writer's perspective. It wasn't from a direct quote from God,
Yes.
that God directly said that
Mm-hmm.
homosexuality or sodomy is wrong. It was from the different, interpreters,
The
which is
books.
the prophets of the day in these Bibles, or anyone of them who was saying that, saying this word. They're just saying that the Lord said this. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, there's been a message or a representation for God or for the Creator, and saying that this is this and that is that. And that's why I made a comment earlier saying that the Bible is very subjective.
But that's what I'm
There's
saying. Like that's different from the commandments. So commandments are
exactly,
Right.
the
Right.
exactly.
foundation, right? The
Yes,
founding principles of religion. And then the
yeah,
books, the Bibles, the
Right.
prophets, their
It's
word
people's
is not, yeah, that
interpretation.
doesn't, that's the subjective component. So we are to say that religion is grounded, the innate right and wrong would be
hmm
the commandments. So not
Mhm.
necessarily the prophets, words and their encounters with God or what they thought was God or whatever the situation is. Who am I to say? I don't know what conversations they did or didn't have.
yep, yep, yeah, absolutely. Yep. And a lot of times when different prophets or teachers or any one of these people, kings, when they spoke in a manner, they're speaking for us a cultural point of view or a cultural perspective, because currently in their culture they didn't deal with issues like that, and when that issue arises, they didn't know how to respond to it, so they respond to it the best way possible for their particular kingdom, which is, the situation they say is so homosexual sodomite is wrong, so they made it into to their particular law, not the law of God, but they made it to their law or their land that is wrong. Now, I'm saying all this because at the end of the day, I also believe into things have a purpose and it has a reason for everything. I personally believe in spirituality. I believe in also the law of the universe, that things connect for a reason. Now, for us, can LGBT be allowed parenting opportunities? Absolutely, they should. And the reason why is because we deal with social work all the time. All of us, we deal with social work all the time. So one point in time in our career, we're going to deal with children who are being taken away from families because of act of violence or any of these situations. It may be a situation where the mom was molested or raped and ended up having a child by their abuser, and she just don't want that child. This is why I believe that this particular situation, the LGBT community could benefit from that situation, because they could take on the child, they could adopt the child, they could bring them to their household into a positive household. Now they lifestyle, certain lifestyles really don't have nothing to do with parenting, as long as it's positive affirmation lifestyle, as long as it's something positive that's going to help the child grow and develop into the place that they need to be a responsible citizen in society. So do situations like that, like for us on adopting a child, is that's great for the community. Even while the original story where you saying that the man slash woman, I think that's what you're saying, the transgender having a child. I
He's a
mean, it's
trans man. He's a trans man,
Mhm.
but he was
yeah,
born a
He was
woman.
born a woman.
born a
Yeah, he
woman. I
was
mean,
born
yeah,
a
even in
woman
that
and
situation.
identifies now as a he. He
Mhm.
only wants to be recognized as a he, though
Mhm.
he still has, of course, his
Female part.
vagina and he has a womb, right?
The ability
Yeah,
to get pregnant, right?
yeah, like
And the
even
only
even
reason he kept it is for that reason. And
To have
so
a baby.
afterwards, he definitely intends to continue and complete the entire surgery. We had conversations about this before I did this show today, because he had been pressing me to do it for about a good 4 or 5 weeks.
Mhm.
Because he was just like, are you avoiding that topic? Are you avoiding? I was like, no, no, no. I'm just waiting for pride. That's what I'm waiting for.
yeah.
Waiting for the
Well,
right moment. I got you. I'm gonna do the show. I have no problems addressing whatever topic you throw my way. It doesn't matter. I talk about everything. But
hmm
as a sex therapist, I had some questions around the current interactions and interactional patterns between himself and his partner, and what that would look like moving into now where they're
Mhm.
post operation, and
Mhm.
now you no longer have a vagina, you have a penis. And what will your relationship now look like, as far as your security, as where your mind is. And because the thing is, everybody at some point in a relationship is going to have some level of insecurity. And so I wanted to know for him, what is this going to look like when you're post-op and now you have a penis that's not as functional as you're expecting or your partner may be expecting for it to be, because we've had that conversation too. You know, what's the level of functionality that you're looking for? What are they all, you know, able to offer as far as the surgical replacements and things like that? So I feel like we've had a lot of conversations around that. And what I get from the conversations is that there is a certain level of insecurity around whether or not the partner is going to be satisfied with what he gets after the transition is completed. Right. So you know, I don't know. There are a lot of layers there. You understand what I'm saying? Which is also why I feel like those insecurities are more so rooted in the individual than it is the rest of society. And when I think about race relations, if we go back to that again, it's the same thing. A lot of insecurities are based on our traumatization and us stepping into a place of acceptance that maybe not everybody in the world is in this place where they want to insult us or they want to take away from us what it is that we feel like we innately should possess or have a right to, you know, and things like that. So if I don't know how many of you have seen the series Them. Have you guys seen it?
Yeah, I've not seen it.
A lot of people were traumatized by that. And I feel like, you know, that's what I recommended that this person watch. You know, I said, I want you to just watch it and I want you to skip to this particular scene where the wife is in the store. And for those of you who have watched it, tell me what your experience was. I know a lot of Black people who watched it said they were triggered and, you know, all sorts of things like that. But go back to the scene where the wife is in the store, right? The store where I think it's the part store, something like that, where she walks in with her daughter. And if you look at her face, her body language, right? Her walking into the store, pay attention to the face and the body language of the attendant behind the cashier, whatever it was, laid on book or something. And if you look at her physical disposition, this series speaks to a lot of implicit biases within us as people who have been discriminated against and who have been extremely traumatized by a world that was not ready for us. You understand what I'm saying? But also what the ramifications of having had that experience are, right? So if you look at that, you have a white person that she was expecting to receive her in a certain way. But the moment that white person was friendly, her body language changed. She even included that white person as a part of her acute psychosis that moment, right? And so you got to really, there are so many levels to understanding this. We walk into a space and a place with our biases about who we are, how we are, and what that means for the world that we're growing up in. Because we're always in a constant state of evolution and becoming. And so I think that when we recognize and we give credit to the fact that these are realities for us, we can remove those biases that make us feel so offended by every single thing. You know, I often hear Black people talking about this was a microaggression. This was a microaggression. No, just because you learn a new word doesn't mean that, you know, everything fits. Okay. Some things are just outright aggressive. Right. Some things are outright true. They're not microaggressions.
Yeah.
You know, and some folks just don't like you. They may not like you because it may not have anything to do with you being Black. They just might not like you. You understand? So when we do and we say these things, I think that we have to be people that do our own self-work and ask ourselves, like, what is it that we are seeing in our interactions with people when we step into a room? So when I had this conversation with him and we talked about how these people feel about him becoming a parent, right? And we talked about his biases and some of the feelings and insecurities that he has around his relationship and what it'll look like after the transition. He spoke about maybe they're right. We shouldn't be parents because we have so much more to deal with in this world that's not prepared to even render us basic health care. And it's not that the world isn't prepared to render you basic health care. It's that the world has questions as to what you're expecting from the healthcare experience. And that should be what you're looking for. The thing is, you've never been in the role of a man.
Mm.
So you don't know what are normal questions when a man goes in for his regular physical.
Physical.
Right. So you've never been in the role of a female having a child, period. So you don't know what are normal questions for the process of going through pregnancies and childbirth and things like that. So I think that your personal biases present in the room before the experience is discriminatory against you. And I feel like those are the things that we've got to ask ourselves about experiences that we've never experienced, you know, from a male perspective. It had she had that experience before in a relationship where she was married to a man and had a child before, right? And then she had a comparison of, you know, I think that experience would have been totally different, because you would have recognized that people are responding to your process in the medical setting. They're not responding to the person, because that's just not what they're here for. They're not here to be your friend. They're here to deliver a service. And in order to deliver that said service, they need to know specific things about what your body is going through. So the references are not to you, it's to your body, what they have to work with. You understand what I'm saying? So I don't feel like he was right in saying that maybe they shouldn't have kids because they're going through so many things. I feel like people should be able to have kids if that's what they desire and they feel like they are ready and competent to do so. And I feel like to be a person that's prepared and competent to have a child, you have to be a person that's curious, a person that's willing, a person that's patient, a person that is ready to give a certain level of themselves to another person in order to help cultivate and shape that other life. I think that's what makes us prepared as parents to step into that journey. I don't think our sex, our gender, our sexual preferences, I don't think our religious background or religious upbringing prepares us for, or is something that is a contraindicator or indicator that we're ready to be a parent. I think that we have to be folks that understand that parents, the most effective parents, the most successful parents, are the parents that are moving into the role of cultivator. You know, and not people that are, oh, well, you're my property, so you're going to do what I say, you know, and that's just the end all be all. We have to be people that cultivate greatness, because we're preparing people to go out into this world that we're saying aren't very prepared for just the person that is different than them. You know, so what does our process need to look like? How do you feel, Susanna?
In terms of this question, I was sitting here thinking, like, I was thinking this question. When I think about this question, let me get my thinking right. That I've heard people talk about that the LGBTQI plus community shouldn't have kids, and I've asked people, like, why, and I've gotten answers like, well, they don't really understand. They're not sure who they are. They don't know what they want to be. Like, I even remember, and you remember, Dr. J, the DSM, our therapist Bible, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, had homosexuality as a mental illness at one point. And actually, it wasn't too long ago they've actually removed it. But they still have gender identity confusion as a mental illness. So people walk around still thinking that if you're not a heterosexual, that you've got some sort of disorder. And as a result, you really kind of sort of shouldn't be a parent.
I mean, I feel like gender dysphoria disorder is a different thing than being gender neutral, or you know what I mean, and things like that. I think that has to do with the process, right?
But I think that's a compensation for knowing that it was ridiculous to say homosexuality is a mental illness. Just like how you started being called a nigger, then that was not okay. So you will be called brown. That was sort of colored, then brown, and now I'm African American, because all those little levels was not okay. It still had a racist tone attached to them. So people have decided I'm African American, which
But see,
makes
that's
it
the
feel
thing,
better.
though.
So
When
there
you
was this,
talk about the racial tones, it's perceptual. So
yeah.
if we receive it as perceptually inaccurate or
Mm-hmm.
how do we say inappropriate, if we say that a thing is inappropriate, that's for us and to our experience. You know, a lot of people have said that the term monkey, calling a black person a monkey,
Mm-hmm.
was discriminatory. However, guess what? My kids jump around, hoo hoo ha ha, acting like little monkeys all the time. Kids naturally will gravitate to what they see on TV. My children love Curious George, and
Mm-hmm.
that kids in innately have flexibility things that they do over the developmental course of life that you know may mimic other animals.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. I love Lion King. Like, you know what I mean? So the monkey, orangutan, whatever he was, that guy was the main character, basically. Your narrator. You're
Mm-hmm.
screaming and giving the story. So I feel like we have to be folks that understand that sometimes we will overstep when we say that something is offensive,
Mm-hmm.
because some things just simply are not meant to be offensive. And there are a lot of things that are meant to be offensive that won't offend you because you didn't know it went over your head. Yeah. I
But
think a person, to be honest, if I had to be honest about it, I feel like there are people who offend me every day.
oh yeah.
It to themselves. They do. But I I can't receive it because it
Right.
doesn't resonate. And if I always say if it don't fly, if it don't apply, let it fly.
Right.
if if something has not been something to me, nothing can be offensive unless I have recognized the
I know.
inadequacies within myself that say there may be some truth to that thing.
Right. It bounces against your perception of how that
Right,
situation should look.
right. So
And that's
things
what we see. That's why people talk about, that this community should not have kids, because they are having kids. They should be parenting, and so it's bouncing against society's perception of what parenting should look like. Just what sexuality should look like. All this is suddenly different from what people's norm in their head should look like, and culture for people are changing. And change is hard for people
and
to do. It's
and
very difficult because you
that's the
make
part
it.
that you were commenting on. So I was trying to find that question. So I wanted to kind of let the urban therapist kind of
Uh-huh.
expand on that component too, because the mental illness component,
Mm-hmm.
being a member of the LGBTQI community in and of itself, just that by itself does not mean that you have a mental illness.
No.
Like Susanna mentioned, we do have a diagnosable condition called gender dysphoria disorder, right? Gender dysphoric
Yeah,
disorder.
true.
And that in no way is
Mm-hmm.
a person identifying with the LGBTQI plus community. That has to do with a person, not necessarily their views or body dysmorphic even. Their views of self when it comes to gender are really confused. So that person may not, one day they might wake up, all of a sudden one day they were identifying as a boy and they felt very much like a boy their whole life,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then all of a sudden today they wake up and they feel like somebody has placed a female within themselves. That's the best way to explain this,
Mm-hmm.
or the opposite. And so what they see with themselves doesn't align with what they feel within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? What
Mm-hmm.
they see when
Yes.
they look in the mirror doesn't align with what they
Yes.
know was there the day before. And then it
Mm-hmm.
expands past that day and continues to persist and become an issue for them for 6 months or so or more. So this is very different than a person who has all of their life, maybe they didn't share it, but all of their life identified as the opposite of what they see. You understand what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
those are very, very different things. And I think that when they did make that transition and remove homosexuality from the DSM, I think that they were trying to not they were trying not to negate the reality that for some people they wake up with DID, but only as it applies to gender. They're still the same person. And for those of you who are confused about what DID is, it's when I try not to get into the technical terms, but it's when you have more than one personality. So you feel like it's a whole nother person presenting. Sometimes, sometimes it's Tina presenting. Then another time it might be Ted. And everything is Ted. The gait, the personality characteristics, the way that they talk is completely different. Like everything is different. And the most prominent feature of understanding DID is that the personalities don't know what the other personality is saying when they're in experience. So it's almost like it's called dissociative identity disorder. So it's almost like these people, they're not there for the other people's experiences. Okay. So she says, so what are your thoughts on NAMBLA and the gradual introduction to make it one of the accepted practices? Is it a mental illness or should it also be accepted? I feel like if I had to be honest, I feel like we're a society that's constantly evolving. And I don't feel like we should move away from the acceptance of things that are considered to be new to our knowledge bases. I don't feel like we should be people that are quickly dismissive of things that are different from what we currently consider to be parts of our culture or what is accepted. And I feel like just like with all of these additions, and I talked earlier at the very onset of this about LGB being where it started and then the expansion. So in the same way, I feel like we have to be people that are expanding our knowledge bases and our resources for understanding into understanding other people's perceptions of situations. If that answers your question. So what about you, Susanna?
I mean, I totally agree with you. I think, all of this is about people coming into who they have, who they're destined to be. And others are trying to understand it. Well, some are trying to understand what that's about, and then there is, that group who is holding on to what they've always known, and that's uncomfortable. So people will do what they need to do to make themselves feel comfortable, and what you get is a polarization of how you understand this community as a whole. You get folks who are saying it's not okay, others who are saying, well, let people be there. I mean, I think and I keep going back to the guy, because this is about this individual who you had a conversation with, who is in the process of really understanding who she is on a different level than what she used to be. And it's getting clashed with sitting in the doctor's office with people looking at you, how they perceive you should be and how you are today. And it's making sense of all of that, and I think about my own transition of understanding the culture as well. I think I've always been, because I come from a different culture, that I've had to learn new cultures, and I've had to learn to incorporate that and assimilate that in my life. So I come
and be curious.
Yeah, because I had to, and I like that word, to be curious. I've just always come with that.
Because
so
like for
do
me,
you think this is a mental illness, or should it be accepted? We can talk some more about what mental illness really is.
But so when we think about, if we think about NAMBLA, right? And that's the reason I said culture and curiosity, because in some cultures it's very acceptable for people to have, intimate relationships with people that have a huge age gap. And for those of you who are watching that are curious about what NAMBLA is, it's a national association, correct me if I'm wrong, of male boy love associations. And so I feel like there are a lot of different levels to understanding culture, right? And so if we're looking at it from the context of relationships and what that looks like longitudinally and even prior to now, we have to accept the fact that there are some cultures where and some societies where it's very appropriate for there to be a huge age gap in people having sexual and intimate encounters and relationships. Right now, we call it pedophilia, right? But only when the person that you're targeting or the people that you're targeting are prepubescent boy and girls, right? So after puberty, we can't call it that anymore. And people go through puberty between the ages of 9 and 11, right? Start onsets at 9. So or for girls, it can be a little bit more tricky because if some of them get their period around 8 years old. So if we look at post period for girls and post onset of puberty for boys, and that's typically when the scrotum starts to kind of take its form, or balls drop, as they say in society. So you said, so should we apply that same logic to R. Kelly because he just allegedly loved underage girls, right? That's what I was saying. That's exactly what NAMBLA is about. Only difference is about young boy love, who protects children. So I think that's what I'm saying. I think that is 100% up to society and culture. And I'm a person that believes the R. Kelly scenario has a lot to do with some more complex issues and the way that these parents consented and the way that these girls pursued the relationships and things like that. There are a lot of different layers there. So I don't necessarily feel like in the society that America was in then, that society, I don't feel like that was very much outside of what was considered to be norm criteria. There were lots of girls, if you had to go back and you looked at, because I've done extensive research on it, and I've talked about this kind of when the R. Kelly thing went on, last year before, when it resurfaced, right? I talked about reasons it didn't go to trial then. And it's because we're in a different climate. We're in a Me Too environment. And back then, things that were acceptable in society then are now no longer acceptable in society now. And society and culture is changing in Black America. And we have to be people that recognize that. And I don't think it's fair to try a pre-cultural case, you know what I mean, in a current cultural situation. I just don't agree.
So then the legality, the law comes involved.
Right. Well, the law is if he hasn't been tried and acquitted or tried and found guilty, whatever, he can be tried again and again and again and again. So, I feel like that is what it is. I feel like back then, parents should have been speaking up and parents should have been moving against the whole latchkey kid movement. I think that children should have been held accountable and parents should have been held accountable. It's a lot of things that I feel like in society was different then than it is now. So you said children are not being protected. We fall for anything that's pushed on us and is toxic and destructive to our people. One could easily argue that.
Yeah.
One could easily argue that. But I think that if you made that argument back then, in the 90s, it would have fell on deaf ears.
Deaf ears, absolutely.
So we're talking about prosecuting cases that took place in the 90s era, where these 16-year-old, 14-year-old girls were considered to be just as responsible as your typical 18-year-old now, more responsible probably. And, all the way up to the early 2000s, that's how society was.
And culture is very different in other parts of the world.
It's very much, where it's still very much norm criteria for. My grandparents had 14 to 15 years of difference in their age. It's very natural, very normal. They were very, very happy, right? I
Yeah.
mean, 14 years of difference.
Oh my.
And it was a normative
Mhm.
thing for her to get married at 14.
At
And he was
14,
in his right.
absolutely.
So
There was no
like,
birth control then. So once your daughter started a cycle, you got to get her married so she doesn't get pregnant and shame the family.
exactly.
So and usually the guy is an adult age. Most of
So
the
you
time
say
he
no
was.
child should be subjected to a grown person's power and control.
Absolutely.
I agree, but what do we
Absolutely.
consider a grown person to be? So what a grown person was at one point is no longer the same as what it is now. I think that that's the thing that we have to recognize when we're having conversations. You have to keep it in the culture and society and the element of culture and society that you are conversing about. You can't compare one culture's dynamics and acceptable norms to another culture. There are a lot of things that are done in America that are not acceptable in Cuba
Mm-hmm.
right now, side by side comparison.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't make sense for us to compare the two because we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about two separate cultures. So within the context of time and evolution, we also have to have the same level of accountability. So it's it's basically you're comparing apples and oranges. If we're talking about things happening in the here and now, that's a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother conversation. But go ahead, Susanna.
I just missed.
It
I
was, it
just
was
missed
on
the
illness
comment. I
and
was
mental
reading
illness.
the comment.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree to that comment too about black men remain locked up, but a lot of them were released recently under Trump administration um, for that same said reason. They said Donald Trump said he grabbed women by the pussy and what happened. That's the right comment, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But what do you mean what happened? Do you think that in a country where freedom of speech is literally what we're grounded upon, freedom of liberty, speech, individuality, do you think that we should have done something by him saying that? And how do you feel about that, Susanna?
Well, this is my. I think about it. I have sons. I grew up around males, so I know, and this is a generalized statement. Now, men have conversation about sexual practices, and this is what I think the person who put that out there did that purposely, and it was designed to create an affect in the community because it further polarized whether you like Trump or not. But it was a conversation they had about women and sex, and Donald Trump said, I whatever he said, and this person took it as an opportunity to put it out there because he was running for president to get people all riled up. But you know, is it a legal issue? I don't think so. I
I
think
don't
men.
either.
I
When
know.
this person says we don't have freedom of speech, feels like that's a fallacy. I don't agree with that. So if we looked
Sure you
at
do.
black music, pins and needles dropping, you can hear them dropping. Black music, black culture, Cardi B said, I want you to put dick in her mouth and play with a dangly thing in the back of my throat. These are things that this is real. This is our music. And we can't say that, okay, we don't support that. We don't support that as a black community as a whole. We can't say that. You know why? Because Cardi B is a freaking multi-billionaire.
Hmm.
She's a whole movement, a whole mood. Meg the Stallion,
And we do have
Beyonce.
freedom of speech. I think people, when
Right.
we have freedom of speech, and when we say something that we think everybody needs to know, somebody comes up and comment about it that you don't like what they say.
Yeah, we
But that's
have.
what
You
happens.
definitely have. The problem is American people don't know what freedom of speech really means. That's the problem. You've been raised in America, and that's the only thing you know. So
Hmm.
go outside of the country to a communist country and find out what
Absolutely.
it means to not have freedom
Have
of speech,
freedom of
and then
speech.
come back and have this conversation with me. So
Because somebody
American,
could call me the N word and it's not a criminal offense. Walk up
right?
to me and I've had that happen before.
Yeah,
Actually called you the N word and you can't press charges.
Yeah, you can say what you want to say to a person. So freedom of speech and threats are two different things. Okay, so people can't make threats against you because everything is considered to be a terroristic threat now legally. Freedom of speech means that you have a freedom and a right to your opinion and to be who you are freely without interruption of your government. And I was just about to talk about that. Official urban therapist mentioned that. She said, that's not our music. Look at who fund that degenerative, degrading music. When you say who funded it, what do you mean by that? Because Cardi B got her start on reality TV. The vast majority of folks watching that reality TV show are Black people. And that's the behavior of our culture. So that's the thing that we're not going to sit on here and deny and act like that's not a norm for our culture. Like I treat teenagers in urban neighborhoods outside of urban America, Black teenagers, white teenagers, Hispanic teenagers, all the same. And by the hundreds of thousands, that is a norm. Kids having sex in high school, junior high school, that is also a cultural norm. And it's been that way. We talked about the thing with R. Kelly. The thing is, here's the thing. I think that with Black culture comes a serious lack of accountability. And we don't want to be held accountable for the things that we do that society on the other end says are defiant, deviant of cultural norms as a whole. The reality is not just Black people do this, but American people in general have a tendency to have premarital sex, engage in regular sex practices back and forth with one another, what they call friends with benefit situations, FWB. These are things that are a part of the culture of America. Period. We have the highest number of people having babies. And that's the science behind it, just so you know. People having babies without being married than any other country. There are more orphans here in America as a result of unsafe sex practices where people aren't tethered to relationships. You have way more people out here that are orphans and in foster care and things like that because people weren't ready to be parents, but they were doing things that parents do to get kids than any other country. We're talking about in comparison to third world countries. So there is a reality that we have to own. And the fact of American culture being a very promiscuous culture in general, it's just one of them. Doesn't mean that it's a good or a bad thing. It just means that it's a thing. Call a thing, and then let's move on. If you want to change that thing, say you want to change it. But let's not deny it and say it doesn't exist, because then we're delusional. There is no way.
And that it's okay for people to disagree with what you say. And that doesn't mean you don't have freedom of speech.
So the official urban therapist says, we have freedom of speech. However, the government is using cancel culture phenomena to allow us to cancel each other. No, that's an us thing.
We're doing that to ourselves because you don't like what the other person said.
The government don't have anything to do with that. That's 100% us. Says y'all really need to research the entire entertainment industry.
We will.
Let's see.
We will and talk about it, and maybe another time.
Top music artists. 2020. What was the #1 song in 2020? Let's look at the Billboard. Oh my God. This is interesting. Top artist year-end Billboard. Post Malone, Drake, Taylor Swift, Roddy Ricch, The Baby, Drake, Juice WRLD. How many people have I named? Lil Baby, Harry Styles. Taylor Swift is all the way down there, by the way, at #9. Pop Smoke is #10, right behind her. So all these names that I just mentioned, and this is music across the industry, music, rock music, all of it included. So Post Malone is #1. Everybody else is us. The Weeknd is #2. Roddy Ricch is #3. The Baby is #4. Drake is #5. So correct me, stop me when I'm not reading a Black name real quick. But that's what I'm saying. And these music artists, their music speaks to what I just mentioned. WAP was number one on the charts for just that single. That was number one on the chart. Like, the United States is majority Black, even though we want to say that the United States, Black people are the minority. They're not. The United States is majority Black. Black artists are extremely wealthy for a reason. They're not only supported by Black people, though. They're supported by Black people, white people, Hispanic people, who all the same. You said, so are these young kids paying their own salaries? We can get deeper and deeper with this, but yeah, I'll let you have it. Well, you could, but what do you mean paying their own salaries? They're making their own music. A lot of them are signed to Black labels, and those same Black labels are still within our Black community, and they're paying their salaries. Also for all their cars and their houses and their lifestyle. But more importantly, who do you think is supporting them? Who's really paying them? We are.
Whenever we buy their music, whenever we download their music,
listen to it, reference it, all that. You say the acceptance of degenerative behaviors are the equivalent to the biblical Sodom and Gomorrah. No, I'm not a Christian, not a Christian either. But you know, who decides what a I've already talked about that. But who decides what a degenerative behavior is? The same folks that support the music,
right? The same folks who said that that's not an accurate statement, maybe.
Right. The same folks that created religion.
Right.
And Christianity, Catholicism, or Muslim identity, Islam, Nation of Islam. The same, it's called groups of people.
And I think, you know, just from, you know, where we started out, Dr. J, is people just want to be recognized, to be accepted, and to be validated. That's exactly all it is. It's not about LGBTQI+. It's not about Black. It's not about white. It's about, I need to be recognized and identified in this society.
Right. Because I think all of that goes to what the real issue is. The real issue is that people have a need not only to be recognized, but to be respected. People have an innate need to be respected and accepted as an integral part of the society in which they live in.
Yes.
So just because you're different, and to go to that person's commenting, the person that's commenting those things, to go to what you're saying, the reality is we will always live in a society where music that we don't necessarily approve of on a personal level is considered to be a social norm. We will always be a part of a society where people do things that we perceive as deviant. Right? We will always be a part of a world where people look different, behave different than us. We will always be a part of a world where people don't necessarily agree with us, and that's okay for them to maintain their positions on whatever it is that they have their positions on, and to see life through the lens that they see life through. But just because they see life through a different lens than us does not mean that they are any lesser than us, that their life holds less validity than ours, that they are less important than we are, or that their experiences are less important than our experiences in life. That's the reality. The real issue is that people will not be able to go through shifts in life and evolve with life and let go of things in their past if we don't, as a society, accept the fact that what is acceptable in one context may not be acceptable in another context, and that's okay. You know, that's the biggest issue. That's okay. He says, stop letting the entertainment industry raise your kids, and it's entertainment, not real life. Try teaching your kids that. I agree. So the fact of the matter is, society will always have, and I'm not going to act like society environment doesn't have a huge impact on shaping personalities of kids, because society definitely has a huge role to play there. However, if the house, the foundation, the family of origin, the system that child derives from is solid, if it's sound, as the way as its way of relating to the rest of society, right, in the environment, then so will be that child's personality, that person's personality that you're now putting out into the universe as an adult person functioning as an integral member of society now. And so the real issue is that people who identify as a part of the LGBTQI community plus community are seen as deviant. That's the reality.
Yeah.
They're considered to be deviant because their agenda, their way of life goes against what so many people feel is moral.
No, right.
Very much to what this person was saying. And the reality is this: they won't be considered to be equal. They won't be considered to be accepted until they are accepted within themselves, and they operate in a way that says that they accept who they are, and the way that they are should not have to be impressed upon another person, imprinted upon another person, or forced on another person. The problem that we're having when we talk about competency in healthcare with people who are a part of the LGBTQI community has to do with the person's own personal reservations. Because I see myself as different than you in a huge way, and different than everybody else around me. I know you must be judging me. That's what the real issue is.
Right. That's
competency in healthcare only boils down to you knowing how to do what it is that you're trained to do, what you're being paid to do to a person's body, their mind, their process, whatever it is that they're there to receive care for. So your personal quarrels with yourself don't have anything to do with me when I'm your medical doctor or your medical care provider. I'm just here for your system and the way it looks biologically when I look at a comparative analysis of what's considered to be norm criteria levels for human beings. That's another thing that I don't get about Black people. They're like, no, these things are made for Blacks. No, the human condition is the human condition. Your blood system is your blood system. The only thing that would change a Black person is an African person that is not Black, that's not American, right? When we're looking at the ways that their lifestyle habits affect their health. You understand? That's the only thing that would be different. And the thing is, unfortunately for Black Americans, is that guess what? You're in the same society as white Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans too. So the subcultural component would be to identify how some of your cultural or subcultural practices or eating habits and lifestyle practices affect your vitality in life, essentially. So this one says, turn that garbage music off. It's promoted for your degradation. Do you have these conversations with these kids? I totally agree with you. But do you have these conversations with these young folks? But not just our young boys, even the girls are following with low reading levels. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of these movements that we're making in the interest of Black folks, separating education. Saying
this is a new culture. This isn't even this. I mean, I have he's just a little bit out of his teenage, but he's a teenager. He's 18. We have conversations that is out of this world. So,
yeah. So I just feel like we've got to be people that hold ourselves accountable for the differences that we look at as deviant, as a means of us elevating ourselves in society to a different standard. I think that we've got to look at things across the board and say that some things are innately right and innately wrong. But even those things are perceptual, and we have to accept that. So I do appreciate you guys for watching, and to my guests that I had today, I so appreciate you guys that contributed as far as the comments. I appreciate you guys. Your comments are definitely appreciated. The one thing I want you guys to kind of take away from this is that equality is a process, and we already talked about what true discrimination looks like and why it looks like that. Equality is a process, and when we're advocating to be equal to another person, we're not advocating to be above that other person or that particular culture in society. I think we're advocating for ourselves to be included. Inclusion doesn't look like forcible practices. Because I'm this way, I'm forcing you to see me as, interact with me as a particular type of person, or a special entity of sorts. You said healthcare should remain neutral, which is the physical and mental health for humanity, period. Totally agree.
That's sums it up.
Right, right. You said, I'm giving them alternative music that empowers our youth because they're looking for our leadership. I totally agree. And I think more composers need to be doing that. I feel like what we've got to do is be pragmatic. We have to get into the art of and the practices of calling a thing a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to understand that discrimination is only discrimination when we feel like it's discriminate, when we feel like, understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that has a lot to do with us and not necessarily the environment around us that we're operating in. True discrimination and discriminative practices happen when we are unfairly unfairly targeted or unfairly dismissed from situations that we equally qualify for. And we have to be folks that are fully accountable for what really qualifies us for the things that we're applying to be a part of, right? So, as I said before, I appreciate you guys for taking the time and having this discussion with me today. I hope that you guys continue to share the content and continue to have the conversation. Continue to talk about what it means for folks that are identifying with LGBTQI plus communities, what it means for them to be a part of that community. And I'm even curious about whether or not they feel accepted within their own community. Ask them that question.
Mm-hmm.
And to what extent, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely love you guys. And thanks a bunch, Voice of Reason. Please, people, go out there and make better choices as a result of this conversation and start having this conversation with more people. All right?
And what do you say? Give grace.
Yes, give grace. Permission giving to yourself for your process and for whatever it is that you have residing within you that makes you so offended by other people viewing you from whatever lens it is they're viewing you from. And then give grace to those people that are trying to be a part of your experience and trying to give you the respect that you feel you deserve because they're curious.